So for me, the struggle has always been, as somebody who is, to be a detective, you're kind of a glass half empty kind of a person, right? Because that seems to work for you. It seems to, if you're more pessimistic about things, you're likely to find you'll dig until you get to an answer. And so I suspect there's probably a lot of people who would listen to this and think, well, I can't be this because number one, maybe I just can't identify with anyone who is a believer. Because what we've done is we've modeled a form of belief as Christians that often seems unappealing to non-Christians. It was for me. Like, okay, if the gate to get into this worldview is that I have to turn off my mind to do it, I just could never identify with somebody like that. As a matter of fact, it wasn't until years later where I would see other people who were thoughtful about their views, evidentially, of Christianity, that I started to become comfortable as a Christian. Like, oh, you know what? There are people like this. And I could see myself then in this position. So I think part of it is that I could never identify with people who entered into a worldview based purely on experience or desire or, a strong belief, willful belief, but they didn't have any good evidence to support it. If you think there's not enough evidence to support God, the existence of God, I just don't think you've thought clearly enough about it. And I know that there's going to be some unanswered questions. And we tell jurors all the time, are you the kind of person who has to have every question as a jury instruction? It's a jury question we ask them in the voir dire process. Do you need every answer before you can render a verdict? And if someone says, yeah, I think I am that kind of person, then you're excused. I can't put you on a jury. I've never been able to answer every question for a jury. And so I need you to be able to, so what happens is I'm going to give you enough evidence that's going to point you in a certain direction, but there's going to be a gap in the evidence trail. You're going to have to step across that gap, and we call that rendering a verdict. It won't be blind. I'm going to point you, get you almost all the way there, but you're going to have to step across your unanswered questions and render this thing we call a verdict. Well, the same thing is true in any form of theism or Christian theism, whatever it may be, is that I'm going to give you evidence that's going to point you in the right direction, but that last step of trust is a step like rendering a verdict. It's going to be across all of your unanswered questions. But if you think, though, that this is the only worldview that has unanswered questions, really, how did the universe originate under atheism? Why does it appear to be fine-tuned? That's a relatively, even atheists, there's the appearance of fine-tuning in the universe. Well, how do we account for that? Well, how do we account for the origin of life, or the appearance of design in biology, or consciousness, or free agency, or objective moral truths, or even how do we explain evil under an atheistic worldview in which nobody gives a lick? The universe doesn't care about you. How do you explain these things, even without a standard of righteousness you can compare things to determine if something is evil? Under atheism, where do we get that standard? Is it just personal? Well, if you can get rid of evil, then by just changing your mind. You see, the problem is that there's a ton of unanswered questions under every worldview. This is no different. I have open questions about how God does certain things, why God does certain things. But I think there's enough evidence at the end of that evidence trail to make that step we call faith. It's just rendering a verdict. And I think that because I am surrounded now by people who are also have this view, evidential view of their Christian faith, that I realize that I see myself in that community. I think a lot of the time the reason why we determine something is true is less now about, if we really are honest, it's not always about whether there's enough evidence for it. It's not always about whether I've had an experience that confirms it. I think more and more, in a world in which identity is more and more important to people, it's about, do I want to identify with it? And that's what's keeping us. Maybe the group I'm hanging out with, I'd rather identify with that group or that way that group thinks, or the way that group behaves. And so for me, I have to kind of sort through all of that. Is that what's keeping me from the truth? I would much rather be in an inconvenient truth than in a convenient lie. And I often say that, Christianity doesn't work for me. I'm not a Christian because it works for me. It doesn't work for me. It's really, it doesn't work for me. I've said it before. It's like, when we were together, my wife and I were together for 18 years before we became Christians. We've been together 24 or 25 since. If you ask my wife which side was easier, she will always tell you the first part was easier because, like I said, we just throw the dart at the wall and draw the bullseye around wherever the dart lands. It's always easier than having a bullseye there to begin with and never being able to hit it. And that's kind of what I feel like we're up against, is that we are now part of the view of the idea that there's a God and that we are not that God is that we're going to have to submit and bend our knee to the one who is God. And I think that is so offensive to so many of us. Me, it was. I'm not bending my knee to anything. We are more independent. than ever before. We can customize everything from our vehicles to our internet use to our media entertainment. We customize everything. We sometimes want to customize what our beliefs are. Now, this ancient view says, no, you can't customize it. It existed before you. We have to bend our knee to it. That's what I found offensive. And I think a lot of people find that offensive. But if it's true on the basis of evidence, would you be willing? That's one of the questions I would have for people. If this is true, would you become a Christ follower? And for a lot of us right now, if they were honest, they would say no. Well, then you know it's not a matter of evidence. If there's something that you don't want to identify with, or there's something that you still want to do that you think you can't do. And so what I would say is I'm just more convinced that the best reason to be a Christian is just not because I was raised that way. It's not because I was trying to fix my marriage. I was trying to straighten out my life. I had a great life before I was a Christian. It's because it's true. And I'm stuck with that. And I'm willing to be stuck in the truth.